Good evening. Here we are once again. Thank you for joining. This is our story half hour, part 2. And as people are joining in, we're here in the temple at Lotus Lake. And this is the book we're reading, which is Siddhartha. And part 2 tonight. Khandro switch something there so you can actually read the cover by Herman Hesse. I was very surprised. As I said last night, this is although I'd heard about this book, this is the first time I have ever read it. So there were some things I was surprised at that they actually might not be according to Buddhist scriptures, but I'm quite okay because this is the book that people really, so many people gained spiritual interest. It awoke them. And so as a woke piece of literature, we go on part 2. So if you haven't heard part 1, it's on my Facebook page. And before I begin, I want to wish you all that you had a happy and a healthy and hopeful day. Know that we here are praying for your well-being. One of our Sangha members was exposed to a positive corona people, several of them, and has been in isolation and is feeling a whole lot better, so we're rejoicing. He's also wearing one of the protection cords against the coronavirus, and I'm also wearing a protection cord, even though I made them, that they're holding a special influence that prevents the virus perhaps from not happening, but also so that it will not be as serious. So I myself am wearing my own protection cords. I know that sounds very strange, and I think this is the first time I've ever done it. So if you are wearing one, good. If you want one, let me know. I'm happy to send it to you. So here we go. We're on page, in this little book, let me say that it's in the second chapter. He's with the ascetics, so we'll be very, very quiet here. Oh, by the way, you don't have to look at me. You could go lie down on your bed, and if you can hear me, I'm happy to read to you a bedtime story here, some spiritual goodies. Siddhartha learned a great deal from the Samanas. He learned many ways of losing the self. He traveled along the path of self-denial through pain, through voluntary suffering and conquering of pain, through hunger, thirst, and fatigue. He traveled the way of self-denial through meditation, through the emptying of the mind of all images. Along these and other paths did he learn to travel. He lost his self 1,000 times, and for days on end he dwelt in non-being. Anyway, I go on. But although the paths took him away from self, in the end, they always led back to it. Good thinking. Although Siddhartha fled from the self 1,000 times, dwelt in nothing, dwelt in animal and stone, the return was inevitable. The hour was inevitable when he would again find himself, in sunshine or in moonlight, in shadow or in rain, and was again self and Siddhartha, again felt the torment of the onerous life cycle. At his side lived Govinda, his shadow. He traveled along the same path, made the same endeavors. They rarely conversed with each other apart from the necessities of their service and practices. Sometimes they went together through the villages in order to beg food for themselves and their teachers. "What do you think, Govinda?" Siddhartha asked at the beginning of one of these expeditions. "Do you think we are any further? Have we reached our goal?" Govinda replied, "We have learned, and we are still learning. You will become a great samana, Siddhartha. You have learned each exercise quickly. The old samanas have often appraised you. Someday you will be a holy man, Siddhartha." Siddhartha said, "It does not appear so to me, my friend. What I have so far learned from the samanas, I could have learned more quickly and easily in every inn in a prostitute's quarter, amongst the amongst the carriers and dice players." Govinda said, "Siddhartha is joking. How could you have learned meditation, holding of the breath and insensibility toward hunger and pain with those wretches?" And Siddhartha said softly, as if speaking to himself, "What is meditation? What is abandonment of the body? What is fasting? What is the holding of breath? It is a flight from the self. It is a temporary escape from the torment of self." Oh, good thinking. Yeah. "It is a temporary palliative against the pain and folly of life. The driver of oxen makes this same flight, takes this temporary drug when he drinks a few bowls of rice wine or coconut milk in the inn. He then no longer feels his self, no longer feels the pain of life. He then experiences temporary escape. Falling asleep over his bowl of rice wine, he finds what Siddhartha and Govinda find when they escape from their bodies by long exercises and dwell in the non-self." Govinda said, "You speak thus, my friend, and yet you know that Siddhartha is no driver of oxen and a samana is no drunkard. The drinker does indeed find escape. He does indeed find a short respite and rest. But he returns from the illusion and finds everything as it was before. He has not grown wiser. He has not gained knowledge. He has not climbed any higher." Siddhartha answered with a smile on his face, "I do not know. I have never been a drunkard. But that I, Siddhartha, only find a short respite in my exercises and meditation, and am as remote from wisdom, from salvation, as a child in the womb, that, Govinda, I do know." On another occasion, when Siddhartha left the wood with Govinda in order to beg for food for their brothers and teachers, Siddhartha began to speak and said, "Well, Govinda, are we on the right road? Are we gaining knowledge? Are we approaching salvation? Or are we perhaps going in circles, we who thought to escape from the cycle?" By the way, this portion I just read you was in pink highlighter. The former owner of this obviously had these same questions. I go on. Govinda said, "We have learned much, Siddhartha. There still remains much to learn. We are not going in circles, we are going upwards. The path is a spiral. We have already climbed many steps." Siddhartha replied, "How old do you think is our oldest samana, our worthy teacher?" Govinda said, "I think the eldest would be about 60 years old." And Siddhartha said, "He is 60 years old and has not attained nirvana? He will be 70 and 80 years old, and you and I We shall grow as old as he and do exercises and fast and meditate. But we will not attain nirvana, neither he nor we. Govinda, I believe that amongst all the samanas, probably not even one will attain nirvana. We find consolations. We learn tricks with which we deceive ourselves. But the essential thing, the way, we do not find. Do not utter such dreadful words, Siddhartha, said Govinda. How could it be that amongst so many learned men, amongst so many Brahmins, amongst so many austere and worthy samanas, amongst so many seekers, so many devoted to inner life, so many holy men, none will find the right way? Siddhartha, however, said in a voice which contained as much grief as mockery, in a soft, somewhat sad, somewhat jesting voice, soon, Govinda, your friend will leave the path of the samanas, along which he has traveled with you for so long. I suffer thirst, Govinda. And on this long samana path, my thirst has not grown less. I have always thirsted for knowledge. I have always been full of questions. Year after year, I have questioned the Brahmins. Year after year, I have questioned the holy Vedas. Perhaps, Govinda, it would have been equally good, equally clever, and holy if I had questioned the rhinoceros or the chimpanzee. I have spent a long time and have not yet finished in order to learn this, Govinda, that one can learn nothing. There is, so I believe, in the essence of everything, something that we cannot call learning. There is, my friend, only a knowledge that is everywhere, that is Atman, that is in me and you and in every creature. And I am beginning to believe that this knowledge has no worse enemy than the man of knowledge, than learning. Thereupon Govinda stood still on the path, raised his hands and said, Siddhartha, do not distress your friend with such talk. Truly, your words trouble me. Think, what meaning would our holy prayers have, the venerableness of the Brahmins, the holiness of the Samanas, if, as you say, there is no learning? Siddhartha, what would become of everything? What would be holy on earth? What would be precious and sacred? Govinda murmured a verse to himself, a verse from one of the Upanishads. He whose reflective pure spirit sinks into Atman knows bliss inexpressible through words. Siddhartha was silent. He dwelt long on the words which Govinda had uttered. Yes, he thought, standing with bowed head, what remains from all that seems holy to us? What remains? What is preserved? And he shook his head. Once, when both youths had lived with Samanas for about 3 years and shared their practices, they heard from many sources a rumor, a report. Someone had appeared called Gautama, the illustrious, the Buddha. He had conquered in himself the sorrows of the world and had brought to a standstill the cycle of rebirth. He wandered through the country, preaching, surrounded by disciples, having no possessions, homeless, without a wife, wearing the yellow cloak of an ascetic, but with lofty brow, a holy man, and Brahmins and princes bowed before him and became his pupils. This report, this rumor, this tale was heard and spread here and there. The Brahmins talked about it in the town, the Samanas in the forest. The name of Gautama, the Buddha, continually reached the ears of the young men, spoken of well and ill, in praise and in scorn. Just as when a country is ravaged with the plague and a rumor arises that there is a man, a wise man, a learned man, whose words and breath are sufficient to heal the afflicted, and as the report travels across the country and everyone speaks about it, many believe and many doubt it. Many, however, immediately go on their way to seek the wise man, the benefactor. In such a manner did that rumor, the happy report of Gautama the Buddha, the wise man from the race of Sakya, travel through the country. He possessed great knowledge, said the believers. He remembered his former lives. He had attained nirvana and never returned on the cycle. He plunged no more into the troubled stream of forms. Many wonderful and incredible things were reported about him. He had performed wonders, had conquered the devil, had spoken with the gods. His enemies and doubters, however, said that this Gautama was an idle fraud. He passed his days in high living, scorned the sacrifices, was unlearned, and knew neither practices nor mortification of the flesh. The rumors of the Buddha sounded attractive. There was magic in those reports. The world was sick. Life was difficult. And here there seemed new hope. Here there seemed to be a message, comforting, mild, full of fine promises. Everywhere there were rumors about the Buddha. Young men all over India listened, felt a longing and a hope. And among the Brahmin sons in the towns and villages, every pilgrim and stranger was welcome if he brought news of him, the illustrious, the Shakyamuni. The rumors reached the Samanas in the forest and Siddhartha and Govinda, a little at a time, every little item heavy with hope, heavy with doubt. They spoke little about it, as the eldest Samana was no friend of this rumor. He had heard that this alleged Buddha had formerly been an ascetic and had lived in the woods and had then turned to high living and the pleasures of the world, and he held no brief for this Gautama. Siddhartha, Gautama once said to his friend, "Today I was in the village and a Brahmin invited me to enter his house. And in the house was a Brahmin son from Magadha. He had seen the Buddha with his own eyes and had heard him preach. Truly, I'm filled with longing, and I thought, I wish that both Siddhartha and I may live to see the day when we can hear the teachings from the lips of the Perfect One. My friend, shall we not also go hither and hear the teachings from the lips of the Buddha?" Siddhartha said, "I always thought that Govinda would remain with the Samanas. I always believed it was his goal to be 60 and 70 years old and still practice the arts and exercise which the Samanas teach. But how little did I know Govinda? How little did I know what was in his heart? Now, my dear friend, you wish to strike a new path and go and hear the Buddha's teachings." Govinda said, "It gives you pleasure to mock me, and no matter if you do, Siddhartha, do you not also feel a longing, a desire to hear this teaching? And did you not Did you not once say to me, I will not travel the path of the samanas much longer? Then Siddhartha laughed in such a way that his voice expressed a shade of sorrow and a shade of mockery. And he said, you have spoken well, Govinda. You have remembered well. But you must also remember what else I told you, that I have become distrustful of teachings and learning, and that I have little faith in words that come to us from teachers. But very well, my friend, I am ready to hear that new teaching, although I believe in my heart that we have already tasted the best fruit of it. Govinda replied, I am delighted that you are agreed, but tell me, how can the teachings of Gautama disclose to us its most precious fruit before we have even heard him? Siddhartha said, let us enjoy this fruit and await further ones, Govinda. This fruit for which we are already indebted to Gautama consists in the fact that he has enticed us away from the samanas. Whether there are still other and better fruits, let us patiently wait and see. On the same day, Siddhartha informed the eldest samana of his decision to leave him. He told the old man with the politeness and modesty fitting to young men and students. But the old man was angry that both young men wished to leave him, and he raised his voice and scolded them strongly. Govinda was taken aback, but Siddhartha put his lips to Govinda's ear and whispered, now I will show the old man that I have learned something from him. He stood near the samana, his mind intent. He looked into the old man's eyes and held him with his look, hypnotized him, made him mute, conquered his will, commanded him silently to do as he wished. The old man became silent, his eyes glazed, his will crippled, his arms hung down. He was powerless under Siddhartha's spell. Siddhartha's thoughts conquered him, conquered those of the samana. He had to perform what they commanded. And so the old man bowed several times, gave his blessings, and stammered his wishes for a good journey. The young men thanked him for his good wishes, returned his bow, and departed. On the way, Govinda said, Siddhartha, you have learned more from the samanas than I was aware. It is difficult, very difficult, to hypnotize an old samana. In truth, if you had stayed there, you would have soon learned how to walk on water. I have no desire to walk on water, said Siddhartha. Let the old samanas satisfy themselves with such art. We have time to begin the next chapter, Gautama. In the town of Savatthi, every child knew the name of the illustrious Buddha, and every house was ready to fill the alms bowls of Gautama's silently begging disciples. Near the town was Gautama's favorite abode, the Jetavana Grove, which the rich merchant Anathapindaka, a great devotee of the illustrious one, had presented to him and his followers. The two young ascetics, in their search for Gautama's abode, had been referred to this district by tales and answers to their questions, and on their arrival in Savatthi, food was offered to them immediately at the first house, in front of whose door they stood silently begging. They partook of food, and Siddhartha asked the lady who handed him the food, Good lady, we should very much like to know where the Buddha, the illustrious one, dwells. For we are two samanas from the forest and have come to see the perfect one and hear his teachings from his own lips. The woman said, you have come to the right place, O samanas from the forest. The illustrious one sojourns in Jetavana, in the garden of Anantapitanka. You may spend the night there, pilgrims, for there is enough room for the numerous people who flock here to hear the teachings from his lips. Then Govinda rejoiced and happily said, then we have reached our goal, and our journey is at an end. But tell us, mother of pilgrims, do you know the Buddha? Have you seen him with your own eyes? The woman said, I have seen the illustrious one many times. On many a day I have seen him walk through the streets silently in a yellow cloak and silently hold out his alms bowl at the house doors and return with his filled bowl. Govinda listened enchanted and wanted to ask many more questions and hear much more, but Siddhartha reminded him that it was time to go. They expressed their thanks and departed. It was hardly necessary to inquire the way, for quite a number of pilgrims and monks from Gautama's followers were on the way to Jetavana. When they arrived there at night, there were continual new arrivals. There was a stir of voices from them requesting and obtaining shelter. The two samanas who were used to life in the forest quickly and quietly found shelter and stayed there till morning. At sunrise, they were astounded to see the large numbers of believers and curious people who had spent the night there. Monks in yellow robes wandered all along the paths of the magnificent grove. Here and there they sat under the trees, lost in meditation, or engaged in spirited talk. The shady gardens were like a town swarming with bees. Most of the monks departed with their alms bowls in order to obtain food for their midday meal, the only one of the day. Even the Buddha himself went begging in the morning. Siddhartha saw him and recognized him immediately, as if pointed out to him by a god. He saw him bearing an alms bowl, quietly leaving the place, an unassuming man in a yellow cowl. Look, said Siddhartha softly to Govinda, there is the Buddha. Govinda looked attentively at the monk in the yellow cowl, who could not be distinguished in any way from the hundreds of other monks, and yet Govinda soon recognized him. Yes, it was he, and they followed him and watched him. The Buddha went quietly on his way, lost in thought. His peaceful countenance was neither happy nor sad. He seemed to be smiling gently inwardly, with a secret smile not unlike that of a healthy child. He walked along, peacefully, quietly. He wore his gown and walked along exactly like the other monks, but his face and his step, his peaceful downward glance, his peaceful downward hanging hand, and every finger of his hand spoke of peace, spoke of completeness, sought nothing, imitated nothing, reflected a continuous quiet, an unfading light, an invulnerable peace. And so Gautama wandered into the town to obtain alms, and the two samanas recognized him only by his complete peacefulness of demeanor, by the stillness of his form, in which there was no seeking, no will, no counterfeit, no effort, only light and peace. Today we will hear the teachings from his own lips, said Govinda. Siddhartha did not reply. He was not very curious about the teachings. He did not think they would teach him anything new. He, as well as Govinda, had heard the substance of the Buddha's teachings, if only from second and third-hand reports. But he looked attentively at Gautama's head, at his shoulders, at his feet, at his still downward hanging hand. And it seemed to him that in every joint of every finger of his hand, there was knowledge. They spoke, breathed, radiated truth. This man, this Buddha, was truly a holy man to his fingertips. Never had Siddhartha esteemed a man so much. Never had he loved a man so much. They both followed the Buddha into the town and returned in silence. They themselves intended to abstain from food that day. They saw Gautama return, saw him take his meal within the circle of his disciples. What he ate would not have satisfied a bird, and saw him withdraw to the shade of the mango tree. Let's leave it there. I am really enjoying this part and thinking, oh, if I was there to meet the Buddha. Good night, my friends. See you tomorrow night. We continue, and I think the Buddha's going to teach now.